Wonderful. So I've got a couple minutes introduction here, so I think we may as well get started, but we will keep admitting people as they join. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. My name is Maya Stark, and I am one of the exhibitions coordinators from the Saskatchewan Craft Council. My coworker, Leah Moxley-Tygrob, is also here and will be helping you out in the chat if anyone runs into issues this afternoon or has any questions. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have the pleasure of hosting today's Talking Craft Artist Talk with Lorraine Roy. Lorraine will be talking about her craft practice and touring exhibition, Woven Woods, which is currently on view at the Saskatchewan Craft Council Gallery until January 9th, 2021. I can't believe we're already almost at 2021. This is the third virtual artist talk that we have run. We're starting to get used to it. Please let us know any comments or suggestions you have. Something I want to take the time to do, which is kind of particular and unique when using a digital platform, is acknowledging the space that we're occupying. As we likely have many people attending today who may not be in the same location as Lorraine or Leah and I want to acknowledge that in consideration of that, the headquarters of Zoom technology occupy the traditional lands of the Ohlone and Tamian peoples, which is now called San Jose, California. The Saskatchewan Craft Council and our staff are located in what is called Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. I want to acknowledge that this land that I am on is Treaty 6 territory. This is the traditional territory of numerous First Nations people, including Plains and Woods Cree, Dene Nakota, Sato, Anishinaabe, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. The land from which Lorraine is joining us today in Dundas, Ontario, is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. That land is covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, which was an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. Newcomers were invited into this covenant in subsequent years, in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So acknowledging the land's history in relationship to traditional territories is just one of many steps that we can take to pay respects to the many Indigenous peoples whose practices and lives continue to develop and contribute to this land. I would encourage everyone visiting us today to go to a really wonderful website called www.whos.land and become familiar with traditional territories in North America. Okay, I also want to take the time to thank the City of Saskatoon and Creative Saskatchewan. Their generous support makes programming such as today's artist talk possible. Now, just a little bit more talking from me, and then we will turn to Lorraine, I promise. I want to take care of some light housekeeping. For anybody new to Zoom or this type of online event, I'd like you to just pay attention to the following. You would have seen a pop-up disclaimer when you joined the meeting. We are recording this artist talk with the goal of posting it on YouTube with captions at a later date. There was a lot of interest in this talk. It is possible we reach or will reach our maximum capacity. So this is one way we can make sure that nobody misses out. Your microphone was automatically muted when you arrived. Please check and make sure that you're still muted so we don't have any noise interference. So that will be in the bottom left corner of most screens. It'll be a microphone icon with a slash through it. So that means you are muted. If you are joining in on a phone or cell phone, you may need to mute yourself on your keypad. Your video was automatically off when you entered, but we encourage you to turn your camera on if you're comfortable. It does make a more welcoming experience for our speakers if we can see your faces. Normally, we all get to be in the same room in a gallery, so while we can't exactly mimic that, it would just be lovely to see your faces. Lorraine is happy to take questions after her presentation. You can ask a question at any time into the chat window, and SCC staff will make sure that we see it and will ask it of Lorraine once she finishes her presentation. For those questions that were asked during registration, I will be asking those of Lorraine to start off the question period. Okay, finally, I am honored to introduce textile artist Lorraine Roy. Thank you so much for navigating this strange new virtual artist talk experience with us, Lorraine.
Yes, it's my first time.
Well, it's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Okay, shall I start?
Absolutely. If you're ready, let's go.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm very honored to be here today. And like I said, it's my first time, so bear with me for all these different, new things for me. I'm so happy to be here. And I just really want to thank Maya and Leah and Sydney and the team at the Saskatchewan Craft Council for the wonderful way that they hung the show and all the great promotion that they've done around it. It's a lot of work and it did a wonderful job. So thank you, all you guys. So today I'm going to talk about woven woods, which is the exhibition that's at the Craft Council Gallery right now. How those 12 round wall hangings came to be, the inspiration, the research, and designing, and the production of them. But first, I'd like to put a little background to this because it is relevant to the exhibition. I come from Southern Ontario, which is that tiny little point at the very bottom of Ontario, the most southern point in Canada, in fact. And I was born on a cash crop farm right beside the Thames River, the muddy Thames River it was called, near a French village called Pancourt. So my first language is French. By the time I came around, any of the wild woodlands in that area were pretty well gone because if you know, the area is intensely agricultural and every square inch of land there is very, very valuable. But luckily, along the river, there's a nice long strip of trees that was left there to control erosion. And that area was a magnet for us kids. That's where all the good stuff happened. That's where the animals were and the plants and the water and all that, fun stuff for kids. You could climb trees and hang over the water and jump in and all that kind of stuff. I managed to survive that just fine. So I think that's where I got my love of trees, actually, because there were so few of them. We had an orchard too, actually, but there was hardly a day in the summer that I wasn't up a tree somewhere, typical tomboy kid, right? So that kind of, I'm going to show the next slide. I'm going to see if I can move the slides forward. Okay, wait a minute. Let me do that. There we go. So that's the muddy Thames River near which I was born. And the trees hanging over it, we're hanging over it just like that. We'd take our canoe and go underneath the branches and hang over the water. This is a piece that I did about, 2001, 2002. That's the sycamore tree that I used to climb on and hang over the water with and watch the fish from. That wasn't on anyone's advice but my own, by the way, but I quite enjoyed those outings. So anyway, when it came to choosing which way to go in my post-secondary education, being a farmer's daughter and thinking about the things I love most, trees, nature, and art, I decided to go into the agricultural program at the University of Guelph, specializing in ornamental horticulture. So meanwhile, my love of fabric and art was growing too, because my mom taught me to sew when I was about 6 years old. And that's where I fell in love with fabric. And there's no going back from that. I just love everything to do with fabric. And so over the years, starting from when I was a teenager, I started taking workshops and learning how to do embroidery. No one in my family had ever done embroidery, but my grandmother was a milliner and mom was a really good sewer. So maybe that's where that love came from. Naturally, over the years, I started to gravitate for inspiration from plants and trees. So, so I'll tell you now a little bit about how the Woven Woods project itself came to be and a little bit of background on that. 15 years ago, I moved to Dundas, Ontario to a half-acre of property that's at the top of the escarpment that you can see here. So every day when I drive down into the village of Dundas, I see what you see here. And I see that snow too. Every time of year is different. It's so beautiful. I found that whole environment really, really inspiring because I think what struck me the most about it, this is one of the pieces that I did shortly after I moved here. I really love the idea of triumph over adversity. Trees can teach us a lot about endurance, especially those trees that are clinging to the rock. And we here in Ontario probably have the oldest trees in Canada. These little tiny cedars, of which is a detail here, some of them are over 1,000 years old, and many of them no bigger than my wrist. So yeah, that's the detail there. And in this piece, I actually put tree rings in the sides of the rocks to show about the ages of the trees as well.
Lorraine, may
Yes.
I just briefly interrupt you? We have a couple yellow squiggles on the slide, and I
Oh,
think I can tell you how to get rid of those. I just don't
oh,
want them to interrupt your beautiful photos.
okay.
So at the top of your taskbar, when you're sharing your screen, there should
Right.
be an annotate button
Um, where it
or
says new
something
tab,
similar.
your screen sharing, and
Is there something that says annotate? And then there should be a way to select clear or clear
yes,
drawing.
right. Okay. Spotlight. Yes. Clear all drawings.
Yes, click that.
Okay.
Perfect. Okay, now you can uh, sort of unclick the annotate button again to get rid of you've like sort of a pencil icon now. Perfect. Yeah, you're good to go. So sorry to
Okay.
interrupt.
All right. No, I'm glad I did because I didn't see it from here. So okay, good. All right. So another thing that awoke my imagination was the idea that what lies beneath is actually more important than what we see on the surface. And we know that with people, like you see somebody's face, even if it's someone you know very well, and you know that what's going on underneath is way more complex and usually more interesting than what you see on the surface, or what they let you see. So I started working on pieces that, oh, now I've lost my, okay, wait a minute. There we go. Okay, so that's, began to give a lot more thought and space to what's hidden underground, the cyclical movements of the organisms and their processes and how they connect with each other. And I started to do some research about soil. I love what Margaret Atwood had to say here. Um, and not Margaret Atwood, but her character Adam once said, when next you hold a handful of moist compost, say a silent prayer of thanks to all of Earth's previous creatures. Picture your fingers giving each and every one of them a loving squeeze, for they are surely here with us, ever present in that nourishing matrix. Each time I read that, I think about how my dad would go out into the field, pick up a clump of soil, and then he'd squeeze it and then he'd smell it. Caring for the soil was more important than the crop, because without healthy soil, nothing's going to grow, right? And for him, it was about reciprocity in a way. And we often see farmers portrayed as irresponsible exploiters of the land, but that's not my experience at all. Like all the farmers that I knew, and I almost only knew farmers in those days, they loved their land and they took really good care of their land. So um, So here's a small quilt that I made for an invitational exhibition with the theme of minerals. And I know that the intent for the exhibition was to talk about precious metals and gems like gold and emeralds and that kind of thing. But I decided to focus on the unsung minerals that plants need to survive. When we eat plants, these minerals take up key roles in our bodies, and when we die, they get returned to the soil, to the plants, and back into the cycle. So these minerals are every bit as important as any precious metal. That's a close up from that piece. So that's just where I was around 7 years ago when I came across this really amazing video talk. It was only 5 minutes long. And it was a forestry scientist named Dr. Suzanne Simard of the University of British Columbia talking about how trees share resources and communicate through their roots with the help of forest fungi. So Dr. Suzanne told about mother trees, which are the biggest and oldest trees in the forest that actually nurture young seedlings under their canopies. Forests, just to say it quickly, the forest trees are connected to each other by a network of fungi, just like the synapses in our brain. When I first saw that video, I really had no idea about what was going on underground like this, and I was completely blown away. That idea of a mother tree is a really rich topic because you can talk about science, nature, culture, community, and I even really saw it as a spiritual, it had a spiritual element to it as well. The scientist in me started asking questions like, why do trees and fungi have this relationship? What's the mechanism and how does it work? What exactly does the connection look like? And how is the research done? So I took my courage into my hands and I decided to write to Dr. Suzanne Simard myself and describing my work with trees and offering to make an exhibition based on her work. And of course, I expected no response at all because for every 10 emails I sent out like this, I get one back, if anything. And I knew she was famous and busy and all that kind of thing. But only a couple of days later, I had an answer in my box, in my email, saying that she loved the idea. And not only that, that she asked me to come out and meet her so I can see what she was doing. So, you know, happy dance. And that's Dr. Suzanne Simard there. So right away, I applied for an Ontario Arts Council grant, and I got it. And in May of 2014, I went off to Vancouver. So over a 4-day period, Dr. Suzanne and her grad students, I think she had more, but we had hung out with 3 of them. They showed me through their labs, and they took me on a road trip through the mountains. So I'd like to tell you 4 things that I learned from them. That science is hard work. There's lots of hands-on mucky work on conditions that can go from really extreme, one extreme to the other. There are bugs, there are animals, some of them are really big animals. Disruptive things can happen to experiments that are left out in the forest, mudslides and that kind of thing. I heard of one 2-year-old experiment that disappeared when a bear got really curious about the little white cloth bags that the seedlings were planted in. Weather conditions can be tough. Disease can get them as well, and they can just disappear. You'd think it would be easier in a lab too, but it's not in the lab because the plantings need to be watched 24/7. There can be bugs, dehydration, disease. No one takes long holidays at science, and some take no holidays at all. So, and this is another slide. So in Vancouver in May of 2014, it was lovely, but out in the mountains, there was snow. There was every kind of weather, actually. We had freezing rain at one of our stops, and that's another uncertainty that researchers face. So here's some of the sites that we went to visit where some of the small seedlings had been planted around the Douglas fir. And we went all the way into Kamloops. And then we came back to the Fraser River area. And I just wanted to add, it's not hard work and no play. Adult beverages are a necessity. And here's Dr. Suzanne with 4 grad students and a couple of friends when we were in Kamloops. All right, the second thing, science requires a variety of equipment, none of it necessarily fancy. A good old shovel. I mean, none of them went out without their shovels. There's the all-important 4-wheel drive truck because you really need it to get out there in the mountains. For lab work, plastic tubs, rows and rows of pots and greenhouses. And then the root results, of which you can see here, they're assessed by teasing away the soil in plastic tubs. And then you carefully weigh them, you measure them with calipers, and then you use weight scales. I spent a whole afternoon helping Julia here clean some roots. And that kind of work goes on for weeks and weeks and weeks. They just come in, clean roots, come in, clean roots. And then comes the work under the microscope with slides prepared and special dyes, and then months and months of data analysis. Tell you a little bit about this map. This represents 30 square meters of forest land that was populated with Douglas fir. That was one of Dr. Suzanne's areas. Each of those jagged green circles represents a tree, and each of those little black dots is a hole that was dug, where the tiny bits of fungal strands were collected, cleaned off, put into containers, labeled, and then sent off for DNA testing. The fungal connections were then identified using, I have to read this, multi-locus microsatellite DNA analysis. And that's just the start, because after that, the results have to be analyzed and conclusions drawn. So in this map, 2 types of fungus were studied. One was found to be much more active and at greater depths. Larger trees were more connected than younger trees, and saplings were clearly being supported by larger trees. The mother tree at the very bottom right-hand corner was found to be directly connected to 47 other trees. And each of those trees were then also connected way out beyond that 30 square meters. That map represents years of intensive collaborative work, careful record keeping, data processing, cutting edge equipment. And it's a scientific masterpiece. And that's the inspiration for one of the pieces in my exhibition that's called Map. The third thing I learned is that dirt is never just dirt. Oh, I've got some marks on my screen now. Do you see them?
Ooh, I do see that.
Okay, do I
So
clear
just
it again?
try, yeah,
And
try clearing the drawing again.
okay, there we go. I'm getting good at this. Okay. All right, there we go. All right. All right. So soil is not just, oh, here we go. I'm not doing these marks, am I? All right. The soil isn't just an amorphous mass. In a natural setting, there are 3 layers. The top 6 inches is the most active, and that's the one that Dr. Suzanne is showing there. And that's where most of the fresh decay takes place. The layer beneath that is composed of the finer particles that are breaking down, and then the minerals that are moving up through the 3rd layer. And the 3rd layer is the base soil where all the minerals come from. And those 3 layers are always in flux. So think of it as a busy sort of 3-level underground parking garage. Everything's going up and down through it. There are billions of organisms, bugs, worms, plant roots, the geography, the climate, everything works together to make a particular soil profile. And you might find in your own home setting that your neighbor has a different soil profile than you do. The third thing I learned is that the best things come in small packages. So what you see here is when you go into the woods and turn over a log, you'll see these fine white strands, and that's the mycelium of the fungi that are connecting the trees. That's the part that you can see. There's a huge, huge microscopic part that you will never see. And it's composed of almost very, very 2 or 3 cells thick. What this mycelium does is, because of its huge surface area, is able to collect way, way, way more water than the tree roots can. So when tree roots connect to these fungi, the fungi can provide a whole bunch of extra water for the tree. A mature oak tree can actually draw over 50 gallons of water per day and a lot more on a really hot day. That's not something that they can do with just their roots alone. So an alliance between the 2 species makes a lot of sense. Now the fungi, they can't produce their own sugars because they can't photosynthesize. So the tree repays the fungus by giving it sugars that it produces through the leaves. And that's where the relationship comes from between the fungi and the trees. Plants and fungi actually evolved together. They found records from fossils show that the fungi and the plant relationship began when plants were first began to show up. So it's very, very old relationship. A couple more slides of that. So when a seedling falls on the forest floor, its new roots plug right into the root fungal network, and then they can draw on the energy and the nutrients from all the other trees and the fungi in the soil. So, and they can do that until their canopy is high enough that they can do their own photosynthesizing. So here we see a set on the left that don't have that fungal support, and the set on the right that are growing much, much better because of that. But however, there's a lot more to the relationship than just sharing nutrients and water. The amazing thing that Dr. Suzanne is discovering, is still working on, is that trees actually communicate other things as well. The connected trees send stress signals to each other about drought conditions or insect attack. For example, if it's starting to get dry on the edge of the forest, they have found that in the center of the forest, the trees have started to close their stomata, even though they still have lots of water. They start to close their stomata, which prevents them from losing more water from their leaves. That is a message that's being sent through the roots, and it's being sent really quickly, sometimes within a matter of hours. That's unbelievable. That's like the internet, practically. And that huge system is not just happening with trees, it's happening with more than 90% of all plants on the earth. Grasses, everything else, have some kind of relationship with fungi. So this is about the smallest organisms helping the largest to survive. So this is the stuff that I learned when I was out there in BC, and I saw lots of details of what do I do when I get home and try to create an exhibition out of that. So I'm going to show you a little bit about the struggle, which took around a year to kind of resolve in a way. So I'm going to show you a few drawings. I'm not going to tell you what they're about because that was about 6 years ago, and even I don't remember what I was thinking. But you know, I did what I usually do. I grabbed a glass of wine and started to doodle. That's kind of how you start, right? So here's another one. I was going to tie something at the bottom, and I really don't know how that was going to go. And then there was the translucent map hanging that would have been really fun to do, but I wasn't quite sure how to do all the techniques for that. So you have to sort of live within your means in a way when you're, only know a certain number of techniques. This is the one that I really loved. I fell in love with this idea and making all these trees, and then having the roots upside down, and then having people wander through this forest of trunks and roots was going to be just so amazing. The limitation was me, I guess, because I don't know how to make that. And so I tried. That was one example. That one is about, that tree is about 8.5 feet high. And after I made it, I thought, I don't think I'm going to want to make more than one of these. So then I thought, well, I'll make it smaller. This one was going to be about 6 inches tall. And I started working on a smaller thing that might make that work. And then I suddenly decided maybe I should stick to 2 dimensions rather than 3, and let somebody else figure that out if they want to, because I'm a textile artist and not a sculptor or whatever. So yeah, so I did this piece here, just a drawing. And then I started to notice a trend in some of the things that I had been doing before, the other drawings, and that I was using the circle a lot. And you can see in this piece, it's even though it's not 3-dimensional, you can see that circular area at the bottom there. I thought, well, okay. I love looking at cross sections. Like at the lab with Dr. Simard, we were looking at a lot of cross sections, and these are all stem and root cross sections. Look at how beautiful they are. I thought, wow, it's kind of interesting and beautiful. And it kind of got me thinking, well, about what circles are all about. And first of all, I thought, well, I'll try and make one. And this is a smaller one based on the cross section that you see on the side there. And I really, really enjoyed making that. That's a small quilt. And I thought, well, okay, that's good. The cross section of a tree is roundish. Round is also the shape of the earth. The sun is the shape of a single cell. It's the center of a lot of flowers. It also symbolically describes natural life cycles and the way the year flows from one season to the next, and the way the processes of life and death flow into each other, like recycling. Nature is really all about circles and cycles, which is perfect to show how everything is connected. And I thought, yeah, I think maybe I'm going to want to do circles. So once I decided that, I thought, well, I should talk about the reason why I chose 12. I'm going to go back up there a little bit. I thought 12, after I chose circles, I thought, how many should I make? And the number 12 seemed to come up a lot. There are 12 seasons, there's 12 inches in a foot, there are 12 apostles, 12 tribes of Israel. There had to be a reason for that. In numerology, it's called the number of completion because it can be divided in 3 ways and in 2 ways. Plus, number 12 seemed like a right number of pieces to do for someone who didn't want to be working on this project for their entire life, like 144 or whatever. So 12 seemed perfect. And I wanted to put 12 trees in 12 pieces. So that's how I made that decision. So I'm going to talk about a few of them in a little bit more detail here, but not all of them, because they're in the exhibition and there are descriptions in the exhibition, and also have a book that I'm going to talk about that you can order later if you want more details. All right, so the nerd in me just loves the 2 first ones that I'm going to show you, and I'm going to tell you why because of this picture here. So the lower part in this picture is the important part. On the left-hand side, you have the arbuscular fungi. And what they're doing, and this shows how the fungi are actually connected to the root. And that's why the scientific nerd in me likes it so much. That little fungus, which is on the outside of the cross section of the stem, is actually moving inside and sticking its little sort of strands inside the cells. Once it gets inside the cell, it blooms out like a little tree. That's why it's called arbuscular. And then that's the way that it brings the nutrients out from inside the tree to the fungus to the next tree. And that is by far the most common way that the fungi connect with trees. On the right-hand side, you have the ectomycorrhizal fungi, and they sort of go inside and they go around the cells rather than inside the cells. So they are sort of dealing with the same problem in a different way. And angiosperms, or the conifers, conifer trees, and Douglas fir especially, are connected to that kind of fungus. So the first one I'm going to show is ectorhizal. So you can see this one's called seasons because I also covered seasons in this, but you can see in the close-up the tiny little cells that are in between those larger circles. The larger circles are meant to represent the cells that are inside the cross-section. So they're working their way around the cells. In this piece, I also wanted to talk about seasons because the relationship and the intensity of the relationship changes over the year. So when it's early in the spring or in the fall, when there's more rain, there's more intensity of action. In the summer and in the winter, there's less action, but believe it or not, this kind of action happens through the winter as well. It's underground, so unless the ground really freezes hard, it's still working. And then I think this is my favorite piece in the exhibition, but this is the arbuscular fungi. And it's just an artistic interpretation of how these little trees are growing inside the cells. Again, a cross section with the trees inside. This one's called minerals. So as I said before, the fungi ease the transfer of minerals to the roots with water, which makes sense because they're moving water at the same time. This piece shows the hot core of the earth and then layers as it begins to release the minerals through water, and then the mechanical action. And then the minerals are then picked up by the fungi and transferred to the trees. That one was a lot of fun to make. So in a dense forest, as we talked about before, the larger tree canopies actually prevent penetration of light to the forest floor. And if you've ever wondered how those tiny little seedlings get going down there, because the soil is actually not very good under the trees. It's pretty light, and the roots of the seedlings can dry up really fast. So what happens is when the seed starts to germinate, it sends out a chemical that attracts the fungal strands to it. And so when that connection happens, the little seedling can take advantage of the entire fungal network that's available to the bigger trees. And that sustains them up until they can have their own canopy and make their own sugars from their leaves. So it really does, it is really like a mother-children relationship. And the other great thing is that it doesn't happen only within one species of trees. Trees share resources between species as well. So Douglas fir and white birch form bonds at the forest edge. Paper birches send sugars to Douglas fir seedlings, especially when they're shaded in the summer. And in spring and fall, the Douglas fir returns the favor when the birches lose their leaves. So that's why I put the two different plants in this one. And the last I'm going to talk about is mother tree. So for this piece, I wanted to show, I'm just going to hang up the phone here. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so for this piece, I wanted to show that when an old tree begins to die, she slowly releases the nutrients back into the soil network. So not only that, the trunk, the branches, and the roots become food and shelter for lots of other animals and organisms. So this has implications for forestry. taking out those great big old trees that are dead is actually not a good thing for the forest at all because of those reasons. First of all, the return of the nutrients and the fact that the dead tree is contributing shelter for all kinds of other animals as well. Nothing is ever wasted. So this piece was actually not inspired by roots, but by a dandelion flower that was going to fluff. As you know, each seed is attached to an umbrella that takes it away, and I thought that was a really good way to portray what a mother is all about. So this exhibition, this is the last one I'm going to talk about for now. I just want to tell you about the exhibition, Woven Woods. It toured in BC, Newfoundland, Nova Scotia. It's been a few places in Ontario, and it's going to New Brunswick next, and Manitoba after that, and then more times in Ontario. So it's going to be touring until 2023. So I'm pretty excited about that, and I'm very happy to accept suggestions about where else to show the exhibition. I've already had a few good suggestions now, so I'm looking forward to showing it some more. So here comes the interesting part for those of you who are textile artists. I'm going to take you through a little walk through my studio and show you some of my materials and techniques. This is my studio. I know I'm really lucky. I don't have a long commute. This is on my property. And it's 20 by 30 feet. It was the original site of the original house that was on the property that I rebuilt to be a studio. That's the inside. It's usually way, way messier than this when I'm actually working on something. It's not a very good picture, but you get the idea. Fabric. So a lot of people ask me where my fabrics come from, and I think you probably notice in life that there aren't very many places where you can't find fabric. And I think a lot of people are really happy that I don't carry scissors around with me, because I'm looking at what people wear sometimes and I'm just so tempted to take little bits and pieces off of them to use in the next project. But anyway, like I said, they come from everywhere: thrift shops, garage sales, fabric stores, donations from friends. And I'm always looking. I use all kinds: cotton, silk, synthetics, metallics, shears, all the textures, not the really thick ones like corduroy and upholstery fabrics, because they're hard on the machine. But my mainstays are cottons, and I really, really love batiks. They're fantastic. I don't do any of my own printing or dyeing because I just want to be able to finish projects in my lifetime. So that's just one extra step I'm not willing to do. But luckily, I have some friends who do it and give me some of their stash sometimes, which is really nice. And that's, yeah, previous one, I store the larger pieces, and these are IKEA baskets, and then the smaller pieces in plastic bags so I can see what I've got. And okay, so at the very beginning of my career, I did everything embroidery by hand. I can do needlepoint, crewel, fine embroidery of all kinds, and I even taught all those techniques, and I really, really love them. But I had to make a decision at some point because I wanted to work larger. I had lots of ideas, and yeah, it just seemed like I needed to change something, but I didn't want to get away from fabric. Because I just love it so much. So eventually I kind of developed some techniques to work. It's kind of like painting with fabric. So there's nothing really traditional about what I do. It's just kind of something that, like, I just try to look at my drawing and I try to figure out how to do my drawing, basically, is how I do it. My machine is nothing fancy. This is a maybe 45-year-old industrial Bernina. And the one that you see behind it, that white machine, is a little bit less old Bernina that I do other kinds of things with, household stuff with. But this one in front of you here is my mainstay. The beauty of this machine is that I can do free motion embroidery with it, or have a free motion foot. And for those of you who are not sewers, that means that I can move the fabric around in any direction. I don't have to go in a straight line. It's almost like drawing, but in reverse, because I'm moving the fabric and not the needle at the top. So it's a little bit of a switch in how you're thinking, but it's very, very, it's a very freeing kind of way to work. And so this is kind of how it goes together. I just put the layers on, and then I start the sewing, just free motion over the edges. And what I do is I use raw edge applique. Raw edge means that I don't turn the edges under. So the fabric will fray, but that's something that I really like. I don't want it to look nice and crisp and clean all the time. I want it to have a little bit of movement in it. Gives the idea of movement. So, and then I just pin everything. Even the tiniest pieces, I just use pins. I know that some people use glues and different kinds of backings for fabric, and I don't like that because it doesn't work with my technique very well. So it's just pins. And that's free motion applique is one technique that I used for this particular exhibition. And the other technique is machine embroidery, which is still done with that free motion attachment, but with a lot more detail. And yeah. All right, so somebody asked, one question was, how do you think the motif of trees lends itself to textile art? And in what ways is it difficult to present in art? I think the motif of trees lends itself really wonderfully because trees are plants, and a lot of the fabrics that we have are made out of plant material, linen and cotton especially. So it's a natural kind of medium to use to create art about trees. And I know really all depends on what your vision is. Maybe not in this exhibition, but with most of my other work, I like to portray trees that look very, very lifelike and natural. And that's another reason why I don't like to turn edges under and make everything very crisp. Most of the time, I just cut up a bunch of tiny bits of fabric, drop them down on the surface, move them around a little bit, put netting on top, and stitch on top of that. I'm not going to talk about that technique this time because I'm not using it with the woven wood pieces. They're too big. But with the smaller pieces, that's what I do. And I like the idea that it looks much more natural if I don't control it too much. I also like using metallics because of that. If you ever look at a tree that's in the wind, you see that the sun is shining off it and you see some shiny bits. And someone once said, "Boy, you use so much shiny stuff in your work." And I think, well, that's because nature does too. So, and I like shiny stuff. Maybe not in these pieces, but in my other pieces. You just go to my website and see those. All right, and then you might want to know how to hang around wall hanging. I made about 3 of these larger wall hangings. They're all about over 40 inches before I figured out how I was going to hang them. And I have to admit, there were a few sleepless nights over it. But I had a good talk with my very intelligent friend, Eva, who said something about hula hoops. And I thought, wow, that's a great idea. I could use hula hoops. But, you know, hula hoops at the dollar store anyway only come in 2 sizes. But I thought, well, I'm only paying $1 for them. So why don't I just cut them up? And so that's what I did. I make a sleeve around the top edge of the piece, and I slide the cut piece of hula hoop in there. And with the larger pieces, I put a bar because then it will wow out. It still will wow out. So that's not a patented method. You're very welcome to do that yourselves. And you don't have to use hula hoop. You can go to the hardware store and there's all kinds of tubing in that you can use as well, which is really fun. Love hardware stores. Okay, so just going to sort of, you know, start signing off a little bit here, but I'm going to talk about Mother Tree a little bit more. The earth can be really quiet about sharing her secrets. The soil is really dark and silent, and the creatures are smaller than the eye can see. I think Indigenous people knew how to listen, and the earth shared its secrets with them. But in our time and culture, we generally don't have such a close relationship to the earth. So what we do have is scientists like Dr. Suzanne Simard to help us understand what's going on under there. And this must be why she writes herself that in the sciences are a place of convergence of ancient, and new cultures. That's her words. She's a very spiritual person. I was really surprised to hear from someone one time how sad it was that science had to confirm what indigenous cultures already knew. And I guess my response to that is exactly the opposite. The ancient cultures offer intuitive ways of knowing and emotional knowledge and spiritual knowledge. And then science polishes that ability to see. We can look under a microscope and see the gorgeous architecture of the cells. And the scientific instruments measure and qualify those amazing hidden processes that are happening. So imagine how much can be accomplished if both those cultures work together. I think they complement each other beautifully. And I'm going to paraphrase another famous environmental scientist here who's also an indigenous person. She's from the West Coast, Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, who you may have heard of. She wrote the book called Braiding Sweetgrass, which I really highly recommend. If we take a strictly scientific approach, we have to exclude values and ethics because those are not part of the scientific method. There's good reason for that, as the power of science comes from rationality and objectivity. But a lot of the problems that we face in terms of sustainability and environment lie at the juncture of nature and culture. So we can't just rely on a single way of knowing that explicitly excludes values and ethics. That's not going to move us forward. And I also want to add, because I'm circling back to what I was first talking about our experiences as children, nature kind of offers a doorway, I don't know, at least it did to me, to gratitude, to wonder, to emotional connection. The way of knowing nature when you've been immersed in it as a child never leaves you. I'm quoting David Sobel here. If we want children to flourish, to become truly empowered, then let us allow them to love the earth before we ask them to save it. So I think to save the world, let's take our kids to the woods. I think Dr. Suzanne Simard is a human mother tree, actually. Just look at her here holding her Douglas fir seedlings. This is a picture that I took. As this whole process unfolded, it struck me that artists too have a lot in common with scientists. We struggle with our materials. We fail many more times than we succeed. And we're constantly looking for money. But the most important similarity is that our goal is to bring secrets to the light and to share them as best we can. I hope that a meeting of art, science, and spirit and culture mirrors what's happening between the trees and the fungi, that they become more than the sum of their parts. All right, so just to tell you about my book, which has a lot of this in it, that you can order through blurb.com. You can go to blurb.com and put my name in or put Woven Woods in and you'll get to it. And they ship really fast, apparently. So anyway. And no, the last slide, maybe it only allowed me a certain number of slides.
Oh, yeah, just try scrolling down and.
Yeah, no,
Oh,
there
I don't
was.
see the last slide. Oh,
Yeah.
darn.
That's funny.
That is funny. That was the one with your sources, right?
Yeah, that was the one with the sources. Huh.
Oh, darn.
Yeah, I don't know how that happened. Okay, I may have accidentally deleted it. All right, so then I'll just tell you in words.
Okay.
All right, let me get back to the slide. Okay, what did I do here? Oh, here. Right, okay. So one really good book that you might want to read about that fungal tree connection, and you've probably heard of it, it's called The Hidden Life of Trees, What They Feel, How They Communicate by Peter Wohlleben. I guess you guys can put that up later somehow, right? The second one that I really loved is a book called Lab Girl, A Story of Trees, Science, and Love. And if you're a nerd or a tree lover or an art lover, you would love this book. It was a wonderful read. And the third one was one that I mentioned before, Braiding Sweetgrass, with Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants by Robin Wall Kimmerer of University of New York. Yes, so I'm ready for questions. If anyone has any.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Lorraine. It's
Welcome.
funny, in a normal artist talk, at this point, you'd have a lot of loud applause. So just imagine we are all mentally applauding you for a fantastic presentation. And I just want to say, I think it's so fascinating to hear about the specific knowledge behind the choices in your work, because we're hearing this background about why you've done things in certain ways. And it gives such a greater appreciation to it, coming from a perspective that doesn't know a lot about forest ecology and these sorts of things. Because there's also so much aesthetic strength to your work in composition and color. And so I just want to say, I think it's a really impressive combination.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to start off with the questions we had from registration, and then I will get to the questions that we've been receiving in chat. So you did answer this question a touch at the beginning of your presentation, but I'd like to bring it back. Sandra asked, where did your love of trees come from? And you did talk about your childhood with trees, but maybe I can specifically ask, where did your scientific interest in trees come from?
Well, I think it's like most things, the more you know about something, the more fascinating it is and the more you want to know. And so at university, I did specialize within ornamental horticulture. I specialized in using indigenous trees in the landscape. And because of that, I did an exhibition about 20 years ago about specific rare and endangered trees in this area. It's the Carolinian forest where we are right here. And so I found that the more that I learned about those trees, the more that I wanted to learn. And that was really about the culture and where they lived and why they were or why they grew in this area. And then it sort of led to more like on the cellular level, why, and the beauty of, I don't know, the beauty of this, of seeing things at the cellular level really struck me as an artist because there's so much to draw on there. And so knowing how they're beautiful made me want to learn what it was about them that was beautiful. And I don't know, it just seems like it doesn't end. There's so much more to know that they're discovering now. They're even discovering that there are microbes within tree cells that help them grow in different ways too. So I've just been in touch with a scientist who is working on that. So maybe that's my next project.
Yeah, that would be amazing.
But it seems like knowing them from the inside out, like in tree rings too. Tree rings are amazing. Like there's so much to be learned from tree rings. So I've done a smaller exhibition about that. And I was scheduled to do one in September of this year, a dedicated exhibition to that, but that all got canceled because of COVID. So I think that's sometime in the future. But all the research is done for it and I've got ideas, so.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
All right, and then we had a question from Monica. Should we order your book on Blurb or directly from you? But I think you sort of addressed that already.
Yeah.
And do you have the slide up?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, perfect. Another question, Van Waffle asked, what are your thoughts on the intelligence of forest networks? Can forests or trees think in ways that are different from us?
Oh, they absolutely think in different ways than us, thank God. Yeah, so I think the wonderful thing about trees is that they're radial beings versus bilateral beings. I don't know if that makes sense to you, but we tend to see things from just one point of view because we have eyes out of one side of our head. But trees as beings experience everything all around them, all at once at any given time. And all of nature is actually like that. Everything is connected. And so their intelligence is so much more sophisticated, so much older than ours. And so we've got so much to learn from that. Like I said, in that where the indigenous people and the science come together, I mean, this is where we should be focusing a lot of attention because, well, I think our survival depends on it. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers the question or not.
No, thank you. And we have quite a few questions. Can I just keep going?
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Suzanne asks, would you ever consider using paper, like rice paper, in your work?
I have used paper. Sewing on paper is so much fun because you hear this chunk, chunk, chunk sound of the machine going. It's really not, yes, I have done it. And you know, as an artist, I think to progress as an artist, it's more about saying no to lots of things than saying yes to things, because you have to sort of eliminate so many things that you'd love to do. But if you're going to get ahead, you've got to pick out a few things. So I've picked out fabric for now, but at some point there may be an occasion or an inspiration where using paper will be just a better way to express it. And definitely, because paper is very, very sewable. And you can also draw on it. Well, you can do that with fabric too, but drawing on it and using colors and everything, it's, yeah, that would be a lot of fun.
Fantastic. Okay, and then another question. It's a little bit, it has a bit of an introduction. So let's see. I love the way you work with the concepts of Dr. Simard. I also feel a strong connection to the forests of British Columbia, and I wish I could get out more often from my home in Vancouver. I just read an article in the New York Times Magazine about her work, which talked about the dichotomy between cooperative tree communication through fungi and competitive fungi manipulating trees to their own end. Theories to account for the, I'm going to say this incorrectly, mycorrhizas?
Mycorrhizae, yes.
Mycorrhizae. Aren't both of these theories really just anthropomorphizations of systems which exist?
Yeah, you know, we humans we're charming that way. We anthropomorphize everything. And you know, that's at our own loss, because then whatever we're anthropomorphizing ends up being only limited by us. And you know, I wish that wouldn't happen, because yeah, trees don't love each other. I'm sorry, they don't. They have much better than what we call love. They're better than us. And so, and we can't even envision exactly. It's not emotional. They can't decide, I'm going to like that tree and not that tree. You know, we do that. And then we think that they do it. And you know, it just drives me nuts when I see stuff like that. But anyway, yeah, sorry.
No, I agree. As humans, in order to relate to certain things, we do anthropomorphize them, and it is often to that subject's detriment. We simplify it, right?
We simplify it and we just give it characteristics it simply doesn't have. But it's very hard for us to imagine a system where everything is given and we're always taking, and we're always taking more than we need. And in nature, nothing makes decisions that way. And so it's very hard for us to kind of, you know, that's when we left the Garden of Eden, I think, is that moment when we couldn't be part of it anymore because we wanted to take more than we could give. And so we got cast out. You know, that's to me what that whole story is all about. And so, yeah, I don't know what the question was anymore.
Well, I feel you did answer it.
Okay, good. All right. So.
Yeah. Let's see. The next question: when did you start your artistic journey?
Well, it could have been like way when I was a kid, because my mother took me to art classes when I was a kid, and of course I loved my art classes, and I loved it in grade school, and I loved them in high school. But I think the true exploration as an adult, as an artist, I'm probably 19, like early, like 1982, 83 or something like that. And I considered myself a real artist the year I sold my first piece, which was 1986. And then I went right out and bought an art piece of my own with that money. But I, you know, like, I don't think I ever didn't somehow work towards that. So, yeah.
All right, a question from Sandra. Why do you choose certain trees?
I like to choose native trees if possible, because, well, and every tree is a native tree, you know, like in one place or another, except the ones that were especially bred and cultured for landscaping. But I like to use local ones here if possible. Sometimes, you know, I mean, sometimes a shape, you know, like one shape lends itself better to a design than another. So there are all kinds of ways that I make the decision, but it really depends on what the topic of the piece is or what the inspiration is behind the piece.
All right. And then a question from Jane. Have you seen the documentary Fantastic Fungi by Louis Schwartzberg? It's available on YouTube.
Oh, no, I have not. I have
Okay. I think we'll all have to write that down.
Yes.
That's wonderful. Okay. Well, please let us know in the chat if I've missed any questions. I believe I addressed all of them. We definitely have a couple more minutes for questions if anybody has any. So just tap those fingers away in the chat if you got one. Oh, yes, there's a few more. Leah just reminded me. Diana's wondering if you offer any classes.
I retired from teaching about 5 years ago. Yeah, I'm doing more public speaking. And again, it's one of those things where you have to say no even to things that you think that you like, so that you can pursue the things that you really want to do. So yeah, I gave up the physical teaching, but I'm always happy if someone emails me and they want to explore something or they want to talk about a technique that they're doing, they're having trouble with. I'm really happy to help people out whenever they, contact me. So.
Oh, that's really generous. All right, and if people wanted to get a hold of you, they could go to your website for that information. Okay, perfect. Okay, well then I think I did get everything else. Any last questions from our wonderful audience?
How many ended up coming?
Well, we had, I believe, just over 65 people attend. A couple people, it looks like, have had to leave, maybe just a little bit early, but yeah. So really well attended artist talk. Thank you everyone so much for joining us this afternoon. Thank you, Lorraine. I really appreciate how much of your practice and knowledge that you shared with us today. And thank you everyone for your very thoughtful questions. You can see more images of woven woods which is at the Saskatchewan Craft Council Gallery on our webpage. Leah will drop that URL in the chat. Please look for our virtual guestbook link and consider leaving a comment. We will send all comments to Lorraine. Okay, thanks so much, Lorraine.
Well, thank you for coming, you guys. That was great. I would have loved to meet you in person, but this is pretty good too.
This is pretty good. Yeah, it would have been really lovely to install the show together as planned. All right. Oh, Leah, can you drop the link to the guest book in the chat real quick before we end our meeting? Okay, yep, there it is. It's that Jotform link there. Okay. Oh, thanks so much, Sue. Thank you, everyone, again. I'll just give it a few more seconds. People can open that link if they'd like, and then I will end off this meeting. All right, some more lovely comments. Deb says, thank you very much for the excellent presentation. And there was a lovely comment earlier, someone saying that the works are just astonishing in person, and I agree. I wish everyone could see it in person if possible. So definitely check out Lorraine's tour dates, just in case the exhibition is coming through your area. Okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to end this off. Really appreciate it. Bye, Lorraine. Thanks again.
Bye, guys.
Thanks, Lorraine.
Thank you.